Well, hello. This is Dr. John Hawkins Sr. I'm the owner of Gateway Counseling, and we're coming to you once again with one of our video blogs. Now, I have a question for you. I always like to ask you questions. Have you ever run into this problem? You can't seem to get your life to go in the direction that you really like it to go in, or you can't seem to stop moving in a negative direction that you don't want to go in. And you really get frustrated about this and wonder, why is this? Why can't I change this? Well, that causes us to delve into what I call kind of the fascinating realms of both psychology and human behavior. Because you see, there's always a reason why we do what we do. We don't do something for no reason whatsoever. But whenever you find yourself saying, I don't know, when somebody said, why did you do that? That didn't make any sense whatsoever. I remember my mom asked me that a lot as a kid. You get some great ideas as a kid, and then you do them, and they turn out not to be so great. And mom would say, what were you thinking? Why did you do that? My answer was, I don't know. Well, we become adults, and we still do sometimes dumb things, and we still say, I don't know. But that just means my conscious brain and my unconscious brain aren't aligned. And so when they're not aligned, they're working against each other. And so for anybody that's interested in personal development or having therapy help you, I need to take a look at this and understand, well, why do I think the way that I think? Why do I behave in certain ways in my life? And so that takes us back to this conscious, unconscious mind, the difference between the two. So what is the conscious mind? Well, the conscious mind, it's a part of our mental activity that we're fully aware of what we're doing. And a lot of times why we're doing it. It's what we can call up at will. Somebody asks you, hey, what's your name? What's your age? Where did you go to high school? You can just flip that off. It's our thoughts, our perceptions, our feelings, our decision-making process, and our logical reasoning. It's the intentional actions, when we try to solve a problem, whether it's deciding where to go for lunch, or we have some complex math problem or work problem that we're trying to figure out. And that's our conscious brain. We're fully aware of it and in control of it. So what's my unconscious brain? Well, my unconscious brain is really the biggest part of my brain. It's like this giant supercomputer. And it contains all of my thoughts, all of my memories, all of my feelings that aren't presently in my awareness, my conscious awareness. Because everything that comes in through my senses, my brain captures it. But the bulk of it is in the unconscious part, whether it's repressed memories, whether it's trauma, whether it's ingrained behaviors and motivations, and it operates below the surface of my conscious awareness. And that's why I say I don't know, because initially I really don't know. It's kind of that hidden reservoir of my feelings and my thoughts and my urges, things that dictate my behavior without me really knowing it. And your unconscious is always working, and it can work for you or it can work against you. If you can align these things up, it's like having, a superpower, what I call it. And so what's the problem, if these things don't align? See, my unconscious, it affects my conscious thoughts and my conscious actions. And so a lot of times people can think they're competent and they're capable, and yet in their unconscious beliefs, they have this self-doubt and fear, and based on past experiences or traumas they've been through, and that unconscious sabotages their conscious brain. Let's look at a few problems, basic ones that come from this misalignment. They can be psychological and emotional issues that can arise this common problem of misalignment. One is what I call conflicting beliefs and behaviors. I say I believe one thing, but I really feel, something else. So consciously, I aspire to a goal. I want my life to go in this direction. But unconsciously, I harbor these negative beliefs that I'm worthless or I'm not really capable. And those negative beliefs then sabotage my conscious beliefs of where I want to go, because the conscious mind is all based on emotion. And so often emotion is more powerful than logic. And so my unconscious can override my conscious brain. And then that leaves me frustrated with a lot of self-doubts because these beliefs and behaviors aren't lined up. Another one's what I call emotional distress. And this can be traumas out of the past, negative emotions that are stored in that unconscious brain. And then these unconscious beliefs, feelings, emotions, and everything, they can produce in my life anxiety, depression, emotional instability, and they come to the surface every so often when I'm not really suspecting it, and that creates mood swings in me, irritability, emotional outburst, and we're kind of wondering, where did that come from? And other people are wondering, the same thing. Here's a third problem that people run into, what I call limiting beliefs. They have these deep-seated beliefs about themselves that were formed during childhood while your brain is still being, formed. And something happens, it could be a trauma, some life experience. And so these negative unconscious beliefs come in and they limit your potential because you can't consistently act in a way that's inconsistent with how you think and feel about yourself. That's why it's critical for these two brains, these two parts of your mind to align. And they'll prevent people from pursuing opportunities that are presented to them. How often have you had this experience? You get an idea and you think it's a great idea, maybe an idea for a business or a book or something else. But before you really act and execute on it, you talk yourself out of it. Like, nobody's going to want to read what I write. I probably won't succeed, at this. And so it limits my belief. And then my life starts to feel like it's stagnating and I'm dissatisfied with it. My life just isn't going anywhere and I'm frustrated and I feel like I just can't do anything about it. That comes from this non-alignment. And then you can have physical symptoms. There's a real connection between the mind and the body. You've heard me say this before, that, our mind, our body, our soul, they're all interconnected and they affect each other. And so what happens, psychological issues in my unconscious can manifest as physical symptoms in my body. They can show up as things like chronic pain, fatigue, health problems. We refer to these things as psychosomatic. You go to the doctor to get it checked out, and they run all these tests, and they say, well, we can't find anything. And you feel like they're telling you you're crazy, it's all in your head. Well, one aspect, it's in your head, but the symptoms are real. Your mind can produce physical symptoms in your body. We know that, for example, about stress. It increases your blood pressure. It can lead to heart attack, stroke, things like that if you're under it for a long period of time, because it's going to change hormones and things, in your body. So how do I align my conscious and my unconscious mind? How do I get over this so I can get this alignment where these are working together and it will help me in my personal growth? It'll help me in my mental well-being, and it'll help me be effective in things I'm trying to accomplish. So let's talk about some strategies on how to bridge this divide. And so we're going to talk about somewhat detailed, but sometimes general. There's more than we have time to mention, on today's broadcast. But one is self-reflection and awareness. And, that's where I focus on things like mindfulness, really being in the moment. And I self-reflect. And you can do that like with journaling, a stream of consciousness, writing what I'm thinking, writing out what I'm feeling, meditating on things, taking quiet moments, shut out the noise of the world and unplug from all the distractions and just think a little bit. Think about, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And what's going on in my unconscious mind? I tell people that one of the ways they can find out about that is they do some, guessing. But you want to be aware, and where you can recognize patterns and reactions in your life. And you ask yourself things like, why am I feeling this? Why am I doing this? What is triggering this in me? So self-reflection and awareness is a huge tool. Number two, therapeutic approaches. This may be where you see a therapist or some counseling. And so you have things like cognitive behavioral therapy, getting in touch with your self-talk, what you're saying to yourself, because that produces your emotions to a large degree. Psychodynamic therapy, where I'm really looking at my life and my past and trying to figure out what are these things that have impacted me, through the years. What has shaped these unconscious beliefs in my life or traumas? And that's where you're asking yourself questions like, not only what am I feeling and how do I feel, but who has ever made me feel like this in the past? And you kind of connect some of the dots. And so encourage people, just start taking guesses. I'll have people say to me like, well, I don't know why it's like this. And then they'll list, well, maybe it's this and could be this, maybe it's that. And so often those are things that are starting to bubble up from the unconscious memory. They had the answers, they're in there. And as they start to put them out or write them out, you will start to relate when you're on target, when you're over the target, that, I think it is this or this or this. And sometimes a trained professional can help guide you through that process. Here's a third thing that you can use: visualization and affirmations. You speak to your unconscious mind different than your conscious. Your conscious brain, it's just like having a conversation. Your unconscious, you speak to it more in pictures, music, things that bypass the logic, get to our emotion. That's why sometimes, people that say, oh, I don't have a lot of emotions, or, I don't cry, they'll go to a movie and they'll watch it, and, it triggers something emotionally because the power of story in that, because it's getting to their unconscious brain. And so what happens here, if you get a mental image of the desired outcome that you want, you create that in your mind, and then you practice positive affirmations that will help align that with what you are picturing and visualizing in yourself. In sports psychology, they'll have you visualize the way you want to hit that ball, the way you want to throw the pass, not focus on how you don't want to do it. Focus on the way that you want and play that out in your mind. And that reinforces then the alignment between the conscious and the unconscious. And here's one last one, what I call emotional processing. And this is where you make a conscious effort to process the emotions that are maybe linked to some traumas in your life that are coming out of your past that have been pushed down into your unconscious mind. Things like guided imagery and narrative therapy, because we create these stories in my head. And what kind of stories am I creating? Are they true, or are they totally false? Or even if that happened, that doesn't have to predict my future. How can I change that story? And I start bringing these unconscious emotions to the surface for healing in my life. And so, kind of wrapping this up, it's important to understand, first of all, that we have a conscious brain and an unconscious brain. And when those not aligned, they'll create problems. And so we've talked about what some of those problems are, and we've talked about how as I become more aware and through some of these different therapeutic techniques and processings of emotions, I can start to create alignment between both of these. And then my brain is in harmony then. And that helps me overcome these obstacles to get my life moving where I want it to go. So I hope these things will be a little help to you in that area. You can go on gatewaycounseling.com and you can read the written blog for a little bit more detail if you'd like to do that. But let me encourage you to always remember that you are designed to be an overcomer. And so align these two parts of your mind and get your life going where you want it to go. Well, you have a great day, and I'll talk to you again down the road. Bye now.